6:30. I'll call tonight's meeting of the Louisville City Council to order, and we do have a quorum present. We are going to change up the agenda a little bit. We're going to move up one item of the closed session to the very start of the meeting, and the city secretary will read the closed session language.
Closed session. In accordance with Texas Government Code Subchapter D, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney pending litigation, Sage Natural Resources, LLC versus City of Louisville, Texas, Louisville Summit, LLC, and Hubbine Communities, Inc. Case number 20-2903-211, Denton County District Court.
Okay. Okay, we're now going into closed session.
The mayor would like to know, city attorney, if there was a motion they needed to make coming out of closed session.
Yes, do y'all have a motion? Yeah.
Was there any action to be taken out of closed session?
Yes.
It was mentioned.
Yes, does the city council member have a motion with regard to settlement discussions?
Could you repeat what was said?
She wants to know if any of them have a motion in regards to settlements that came out of closed session.
Okay. Did the council member have anything? I was thinking that it was an agreement between the two attorneys that the council was going to come up with the motion. I mean, was going to state the motion, but probably would be written down by the city attorney.
Go back into executive session. Go back into. Can we go back into executive session, Mayor?
Okay, nothing?
No, we're going to go back, and she'd like to go back into closed session.
Okay. We'll go back into closed session. Back into open session. Council, is there any action to be taken?
Let's make sure everybody's in first.
Okay. What's your call?
We have Councilman Gilmore, Councilman Troyer, Councilman Jones, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green, and Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson. Everyone is back in regular session.
Okay. Is there any action to be taken out of closed session?
Mayor, Councilman Gilmore here. I'd like to move to authorize our legal counsel to move forward with settlement discussions with Sage Natural Resources, if I could speak today.
Okay, can I put it in the form of a motion?
I would like to move that, yes.
Okay, second.
Okay, I show that Councilman Gilmore made the motion, Councilman Troyer seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson?
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green?
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Okay. So we're past that one now. Now discussion regarding food trucks.
Yes, sir. So Claire and various directors will be adding to her presentation on food trucks, and we're trying to figure out how to get the presentation up in front of you, the PowerPoint, and then we'll get started, Mayor.
Okay.
Get back to the right now. Right there. Now she's. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Half of it.
Yeah, we just have to minimize another screen. We're good.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
So tonight, this is going to be a team effort, and this is with myself and Chris McGinn, and Stacy Anaya, and Richard Lupke are going to be presenting. And this may seem like odd timing in the time of COVID to talk about food trucks, but it has it's come up for a couple of reasons. One, because we have a food truck that has started within Louisville, and our regulations aren't exactly applicable to what they're trying to do, and so we wanted to have a touch point with council on that. And also, we have a food truck park that has submitted preliminary plans to us and asked for feedback, and our ordinance currently does not allow food truck parks. And so wanted to get council's feedback on that to potentially allow for that. So with that, I wanted to start off by explaining that Louisville's food truck regulations were originally drafted before gourmet food trucks were a thing. It was really drafted for construction food trucks that just went from one construction site to another construction site. We've been able to apply them to gourmet food trucks, and it's worked out okay. But I think if we are going to, we are a little bit more restrictive than most other cities with regard to gourmet food trucks, and so we wanted to talk about kind of how we fit in the Metroplex and get your temperature with regard to changing it. So there are, I wanted to go through the organization of this presentation first because things can be a little bit confusing with food trucks. So the first part of our presentation is going to talk about individual food truck regulations. So that's every single food truck in the city of Louisville has to meet these regulations, whether or not you allow food trucks in parks or you allow food trucks in food truck parks. All of them have to meet the individual food truck regulations as well. So the first part is going to talk about those individual food trucks. The second one will talk about food truck parks, or otherwise known as food truck courts. That would be like the truck yard in the colony and things like that. And then food trucks in parks is something separate, and Stacy and I is going to handle that. And then finally, we're not talking about that today, but I want to talk, just explain that special events are something different. So all of these regulations that we're going to go over, the rules basically, other than just health inspections, but like the locations and times, when they're dealing with special events, we deal with that on a case-by-case basis. People make applications for special events, and food trucks get tacked on to those as well. So we're not actually going to talk about those special events today. That's going to come at a later time. Chris McGinn and his team have found that we probably can better our special event permit application process, and it may be necessary, especially as Castle Hills may come into the city of Louisville, because there are so many special events that happen out in Castle Hills, and that may be changes we need to make prior to annexation. With that, to give you kind of the baseline for individual food trucks, the definition, we don't have a definition for food trucks. It is a mobile food establishment. It's a vehicle-mounted food establishment that is readily movable, and that means it applies to construction site food vehicles just as it does food trucks. Unless it's part of a special event permit, which I talked about prior, a mobile food establishment cannot operate on any street, median, or sidewalk in the city. So you may see them at special events or city events. That's because there's a special event permit, but otherwise they're not allowed. They're not allowed in residential property except for ice cream push carts, which have their own rules, and within 1,000 feet of a school or within 1,000 feet of a special event permit or city operated event. That last one was tacked on later, mainly because people were setting up food trucks right outside of our permitted events. And so then they were pulling people from our special events outside of the boundaries of that. Mobile food establishments, interestingly enough, by our ordinance currently are allowed within city parks, but you have to have written agreement from the city. To the best of our knowledge, the city has never given authorization for a food truck to be in a city park. I'm going to hand it over to Chris McGinn now. He's going to talk about the health department's oversight.
Can you all hear me okay?
You can speak a little louder, Chris.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So just talking about some of the regulations over our mobile vendors, our food trucks. Prior to them getting a mobile vendor's permit, that's a permit for the entire year. They do have to pass a health inspection prior to serving to the public. Some requirements that are listed here. Commissary approval is just kind of a fancy name for a kind of a central location where they're storing their food, getting clean water. In other words, we want to know that that truck's connected to a location that is has a valid health permit. Along with that location, we get a copy of that permit, and we also make sure that we get food safety manager certification in addition to insurance, driver's license, and a few other items. These vehicles, once they have a mobile vendor's permit for the year, they have to check into this facility on a daily basis. And so, some cities have had some difficulties with this in the area that, the mobile vendor would be stationary overnight and it would not check in with the permitted facility. And so you actually had a situation where, people were living in the mobile vendor vehicles, and they were doing a story with one of our survey cities that somebody was washing their hair and they zoomed in on the soap bubbles coming out of the back of the vehicle, and the owner of the vehicle answered the back of the mobile vendor vehicle with a towel wrapped around her head. So it's very important for cities to make sure that once these vehicles are permitted, that they're actually going to those facilities and getting food, getting clean water, dumping their dirty water, and cleaning their vehicle at those facilities. Going on to the next slide, mobile food establishments. We have currently 11 total mobile permits, but just talking about what food trucks specifically, we have 8. LISD has a vehicle that they use for their events. Salvation Army also has another vehicle. 4 of these permitted vehicles are just going to construction sites. And then we also have In-N-Out Burger and 7 Loaves Catering. So that's currently the vehicles that we have permitted. In addition to that, you might see a mobile vendor that is not tied to a special event permit, but it might be tied to a temporary health permit, and we had 12 of those in 2019. And that is mainly because an annual mobile vendor's permit is $300, whereas you can get a one-time temporary health permit for $50. And so sometimes our mobile food trucks, they're operating under that short-term permit. Some of the trends that we're seeing, 2020 definitely noticed that we're down to 8 permits from 14. That may have to do with, I'm sure that it has to do with the current pandemic. And also, as far as a city like Carrollton, we're kind of on par with the amount of vehicles that they have permitted, whereas you may see 2 or 3 times more vehicles permitted for a city like Denton, where you have a little bit more of the college town style, and it kind of lends itself to that a little bit more. In addition to that, permitted trucks, they want to make about $350 to $400 an hour. So some of the locations that were wanting a food truck to come out, they have to make sure that they have that amount of business in order for them to be interested. Just coming out to serve 20, 30 people, more than likely you're not going to be able to get a food truck to come out for something like that.
Okay, so one of the, I preluded to this issue was that we do have a food establishment that has opened up a food truck in Louisville. So their home base is in Louisville. This is 7 Loaves Catering, and they're located, this is the shopping center where the old Kroger building was, on 121, and then there is, in this corner, if you can see I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, but in the corner, one of the corners, there's a small building there called for 7 Loaves Catering. They have gotten a food truck and they're calling it Southern Drawl Barbecue. So Southern Drawl Barbecue approached the city and said, my landlord is putting out some tables and chairs out in this area right by the new 7-Eleven on Business 121. And I would like to park my vehicle out there and be able to serve them for lunch. And our regulations because we have a regulation that says that you cannot serve past 10 minutes past your last customer, that regulation was in place when we first adopted regulations related to construction trucks, right? So you go from one construction zone to another, site to another, you've got your construction workers that come out and buy your food, and then the moment the last person buys the food, you go off to the next construction site. So we've been applying that to our food trucks, and that has worked out well with regard to, let's say, Bent Distillery. So like Bent Distillery says they want to have a food truck out there. Well, we basically say 10 minutes past your last customer. It means if you've got a tour going on, it's however long that tour goes on, you can have that food truck there. So we've been able to find a way to apply that. But with regard to a food truck just sitting in a parking lot, they have to meet this rule. So if you don't have a customer for 10 minutes, you have to move along, because we don't have any regulations that truly allow stationary vehicles. So we have told them, we don't have any regulations in place with regard, you can pull up to any place and serve someone, but you can't, after your last customer, you have to move on. So you have that 10-minute rule. They understand that. Of course, for them to move along, they just move across the parking lot, right, until their next customer comes. So there's kind of this inefficiency and difficulty with enforcement. And there's also the question of, what is your last customer? Could they argue, well, my last customer is still yet to come? That's not how that's been interpreted historically, nor in other cities. But I think we need to clarify that. And really, we wanted to get from council some direction on whether or not this is something you want to allow for a time period, an hour in the afternoon, or if you want them just to move along and stick with the 10-minute rule. The other problem was, because all of our rules were related to not having stationary vehicles, we don't have any other safeguards that other cities that have true food truck regulations have in place. So if we were to allow a little bit more flexibility for this gentleman to stay out here, we probably want to have some of the other safeguards that other cities have. I'm going to have Chris McGinn kind of talk through this summary of a survey that we've done of how other cities are regulating.
So when we took a survey of the different cities, a lot of times when you do a survey, you find some sort of common answer to the situation you're dealing with. And what we found was really cities are kind of all over the board on how they handle this. We were finding the ordinance maybe in their itinerant merchant area of their ordinance. Most were in mobile vendors, some were in zoning. And so it was difficult to find their ordinance. It was also difficult to really talk one-on-one with how the actual process works. But we got a really good amount of information here. As Claire said, ordinances that are dealing with time after the last customer becomes very difficult to enforce. So if you're looking at, for example, the city of Arlington or the city of Carrollton, in addition to Louisville, those cities are looking at time after the last customer. Also, what we were looking at were what cities in our survey cities have some sort of ordinance that deals with, okay, if that food truck wants to be stationary, what are some other options that we have here? Is it some sort of process where the health department or the building official is looking at certain requirements, or is it strictly just a process where that they would have to go through a special use permit or a conditional use permit, or do they not have any process whatsoever? What we were finding with our cities is all the cities require their permitted food trucks to check in daily with their commissary, meaning that they truly can't remain stationary. And also the amount of time a food truck can be stationary, the time limits that are listed here without an asterisk mean that, for example, Fort Worth with 1 hour, if I want to be at a location from the hour of 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock or from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, this is the time I'm going to be there, whether or not I have a customer. And so, we are seeing that some cities definitely don't have a process like Louisville. And we were hoping to be a little bit more flexible with what we have, because it's difficult to enforce the 10-minute. Also, one of the things that we saw with some of the ordinances is that cities like Arlington, Fort Worth, and Frisco and Richardson, they allow a food truck to operate extended periods of time. So if that food truck is accessory to a business. So for example, Bent Distillery, if during their hours of operation, if they're open, a permitted food truck can be there during their hours. We wouldn't necessarily have to look at the 10 minutes. They would be allowed to be there without necessarily having to have them go through the SUP process. Also, some of the cities had added that particular business would have to have a current CO.
So with that, and again, this is just for the individual trucks. So Richard is going to next talk about food truck parks, and Stacy will talk about food trucks in parks. But having looked at all of these cities and what they were doing, if we were to change this for individual trucks, staff would be recommending that we would allow food trucks to be an accessory use to a primary use for their certificate of occupancy. They would have to be located on the same premises, and to the extent practicable, locate and orient the vehicle on site in a manner that clearly serves the employees and patrons of the property and would not be to attract or solicit businesses from neighboring streets or the public in general. And that they would be limited to the business hours of that primary use. So give you examples of this. It would be okay if you had, for example, Bent Distillery, that's just the example that just keeps coming up. If they had a food truck that wanted to stay all hours that they were open, it's that food truck parks right next to their building. It faces inward, so it's clearly serving their patrons. That would be allowed as long as that building was open, because it's accessory to that building. On the other hand, if someone wanted to park, let's say, at a gas station, and they had permission from that property owner, and they wanted to just face out towards the street and be able to pull people from that street to come on, that would not necessarily be allowed if we did that. So that was one of the first things we wanted to talk about. The other thing that we want feedback from council on is the time frame. So we would say if we did that where we allowed everything them to be accessory and operating during those business hours of that primary use, would the remaining, do we want to still stick with, and honestly, staff was thinking, well, why don't we just stick with that 10-minute rule from everyone else? So you basically have to move along unless you have a home base with an established restaurant. You're not trying to pull people off the street, you're really serving that primary use. But we wanted to touch base with council and see if you had an interest in opening it up to more than that. If you wanted to allow food trucks to not be serving as an accessory use to a primary use, if you wanted them to be able to do, basically set up, let's say at the Shell station at the corner of Main Street and I-35, you could establish like other cities. I mean, Fort Worth has a 1-hour time frame, so they could set up shop and serve for an hour during the day. And if you did that, would you want to do some type of distance from a brick and mortar food establishment? So Fort Worth does 1 hour, and then they also do, it must be greater than 300 feet from a brick and mortar establishment or get consent. The other regulations on this page, I'm not going to go into much details on it. These are all just kind of normal. You're going to get to use temporary tables and chairs, but you got to take them with you. You can have like a sandwich board sign, but you're going to have to take that with you. Those are just common terms that are used in most of these ordinances. But we really wanted to stop here and get direction from council. Are you interested in some iteration of allowing food trucks to be more than just that 10-minute rule where you're pretty much moving them along? Do you guys have any questions for me?
I'll say I think we definitely need to do something with our rules because there's we're a little outdated. The 10-minute rule seems kind of unenforceable to me unless somebody's out there with a stopwatch. Not only could they move, but you could also go say, okay, well, you haven't had a customer, and they'll say, no, we've had 5 more minutes. And unless we knew, it would be just really hard to enforce. I like the idea of putting, maybe extending that time some, but putting regulations on it as far as what you were saying about they can't be within a certain distance of a brick and mortar establishment, because that would be with food trucks. That's really, as much as I think it's, as a trend and people really like them. I don't want them to come in and steal business from the restaurants. So if we can manage that, I'm good with that.
Okay.
So Kristen, what if the restaurant gave permission? I noticed some of the ordinances had a statement like that. They had to have a certain distance unless you had the consent of the restaurant. Are you okay with that?
I would assume that they would have to have consent of every restaurant that was within that perimeter. But yeah, in that case, if there would be something that maybe those restaurants felt like was an accessory or complementary to what they serve, then I'd be okay with that as long as they were able to give the permission. Yes.
I've got to follow up on Kristen's too, which to me would be like a bandit restaurant, a bandit food truck. I don't think that's what this was saying to do, was it?
No, it would be a current. We really would be triggering it off of an operating restaurant.
Yeah, it wouldn't be somebody that's going in and getting close to a restaurant and just opening up. That wouldn't be permissible. Is that correct?
Say that again, Mayor, I'm sorry.
Okay, the question came up with what Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green said, was that someone could go in there and just get within 400 feet of a restaurant and open up. That wouldn't be permissible without approval of a restaurant. Is that correct?
As long as they were out, well, right now, as proposed, it would be a 300 foot. So if you were.
Whatever the number is.
Yes.
They had to have approval of the restaurant.
Yes.
They couldn't just go out like a bandit and set up somewhere.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the point I was making.
Claire?
Yes.
So I'll kind of walk down the list here with some notes. First item, distance to a brick and mortar restaurant. The biggest thing that concerns me about food trucks is that they can operate so much cheaper than a brick and mortar can. They're not necessarily attached to the city of Louisville, not paying property taxes. They may be paying for a commercial vehicle license, but they're not paying any property taxes. So the last thing I want to do is have food trucks competing against established restaurants that have all those additional expenses, including wait staff and certainly their either their lease costs, which I realize the truck has a cost, but their lease costs, which ultimately incorporates, whether they see it or not, some of the property tax or all of the property taxes being paid on that location. I don't want food trucks stealing from brick and mortar restaurants. So I don't know what distance to set. I mean, by the way, side note, if we set a distance and a brick and mortar says, sure, they can set up out there, then fine, that's their decision. I don't want to interfere if that's what they want. But I don't know what the distance should be, but somehow even 300 feet does not make me comfortable. I just feel like it's too easy for somebody to say, let's go to lunch, and then they show up and go, oh, you know what, let's don't wait in the line in there, we just go get food over here. And so that brick and mortar loses business. So that's my biggest concern. My second concern has to do with restrooms. So we set this, within 500 feet of restroom, that's fine. But whose restroom? So it says, restroom for employees and patrons, but there aren't a lot of, just public restrooms on private property. And so I'm scratching my head wondering whose restroom are we talking about? Because I kind of conjures up that memory of Subway there on Boydros Plaza saying, well, if you're having a Tuesday concert, you can't come in here and use our restroom. And in fact, we're just going to shut down business because we're tired of that. So I don't know. That seems like a can of worms. I don't know the answer. So let me finish my list and then I can let you address each one of these. Temporary tables, that all makes sense. No signs on the side, no menu boards, that kind of stuff. This makes sense. Written consent of the property owner, obviously. And proof, must have proof. Keep a commissary log and can't make the existing property illegal. All the rest of that stuff makes sense. So my focus really is on impact to an existing restaurant, and then whose restrooms are we 500 feet from?
Yeah, so the answer to the restrooms, because that's the easier one, is really you have to just end up showing us a written restroom agreement. So for example, if I set up shop right at a Shell gas station, probably within 500 feet, the only place to get a restroom available to me would be the Shell. So you already are going to have to get that property owner's consent, but likely it's going to be that same property owner who's giving you consent to use their restrooms and make it available to all your customers. So the city would be requiring proof of that written restroom agreement.
Okay, because the language you have here says the city may require proof. So you're saying we would require proof.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. It should say would require proof.
Okay, because that I should have pointed that out. That's kind of where I read that and went, may? No, it's you absolutely need to have that proof.
Right. I'll go back to the survey. So with regard to, let's see, I need to move this.
Drag them out of the way, just click it.
Hold on, I'm trying to move all of you out of the way so I can see this.
Well, while you're moving that, I'm going to have one more thing for you about the 10-minute business, but we'll come back to that at the end.
Okay, so when it looks like 300 feet is Fort Worth, and then 200 feet was, my goodness, I have to keep dragging you guys. 200 feet was Plano, and then most of the other ones are really requiring you to be auxiliary to a business, and so that's the other option you could do if council is not interested in having these standalone, I'm calling them standalones, where they have, but instead just saying, okay, we're not really interested in having these standalones for an hour and then having to worry about all these other regulations. Really, the only way you could do it is if you're an accessory use to a primary use. That's one option. And the other is obviously we could just go beyond 300 feet. We just haven't seen that in the Metroplex, but that doesn't mean we couldn't put additional distance in there.
So the thought there is, for me, is that let's take a strip center owner who says, I tell you what, pay me this, I'll let you put your truck here. And, it's outside that 300-foot boundary with existing restaurant, but it's nevertheless a shock and an amazement to the restaurant that they now have competition in the parking lot, that it's not very far away. And again, you go to lunch and look at the line and go, well, let's just go get food over here and we'll take it back to work. So yeah, distance concerns me. I want to protect the brick and mortars. They're much more invested into the city. So let's jump ahead then to the 10-minute thing. I'm with Chris. I had the same exact response to the 10 minutes. It's like, how do you enforce this? It seems, once you create an ordinance that's really not enforceable, it's worthless. So, and I'm not sure what the answer is. Is it the 1 hour rule and you have to keep a log of where you are, which wasn't, that log wasn't mentioned in any of your work that I saw. I don't know. Somehow the 10-minute rule seems so nebulous that we're just creating a meaningless rule. And then if we think we're going to enforce it, we're creating an enforcement headache.
Okay.
Your thoughts?
What'd you say?
Your thoughts?
My thought. I agree with the 10-minute rule being. It's nebulous. Yes, I agree. I think no matter what, we're going to have to clean that up. Even if council said we still like 10 minutes, I would probably say you can only be someplace 10 minutes. Period. Right? You just set a time. So really, it's up to council how long they want that time to be. Our thought originally was you make them accessory only to the primary use, which was that first bullet point. And then we were okay with any time. It's really up to, it's all about how many food trucks do you want to see potentially. If they're not able to be stationary, you're not going to see many outside of those accessory uses. If you're going to give them an hour, I think Chris McGinn and I talked about that earlier. He's like, that's very easy to administer. You give an hour and then we can require this space. I think all of these options are better than, like you said, that 10-minute after last customer rule.
And remember, the 10-minute rule was written when these food trucks existed just to go serve as a food source for a construction site.
Yeah.
Once you finish, and that was the message, you've got to be gone in 10 minutes. You just can't hang around here all day to see if somebody wants a soda. So it makes more sense to me that obviously if you wanted to say 1 hour after your last customer, because again, you've got that rule, they have to go to the commissary every day. So I think after that, it's really up to council, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour, whatever you're comfortable with.
Well, and the trucks that were servicing work sites pretty much had a schedule they were working on. You could go to the site and ask them, when does your truck show up? And they could tell you.
That's
And it's because, you know, here's my window. I'm going to be here from this time to this time. Get your food and get done, and I'm moving by.
Exactly.
And it's a different deal. This is a totally different deal.
It is, completely. I mean, the experience we've had thus far is this auxiliary to a restaurant makes sense. So that's what Claire described earlier that we've actually had here in Louisville, because they really actually, they're not so much of a restaurant, they're actually a catering business, and they wanted to be able to have the food truck along with their catering business. So it was auxiliary to that business, and that makes a lot of sense. So council, you could actually write it, you have to be auxiliary to a restaurant or within, and whatever that might be, 300 to 400 to 500 feet, you have to have permission of every restaurant within that range if you're going to be on that property. It makes it more complicated, I think, but as Councilman Ferguson said, you are protecting your brick and mortar restaurants. That makes
Why are you concerned about the other restaurants? Just make it that they have the owner's permission, whoever owns that property. And still be within a certain footage from the restaurant that's their quote sponsor.
Now, the only problem with that, Mayor, is you potentially could have a business owner, a property owner that would approve it, and then they show up and then the restaurants are all shocked because now they've got this competition in their parking lot. So that'd be the only concern I might have with that.
But then there could be, I don't know, where do you go with the 400 feet? Is it a radius?
Yes.
The radius so each restaurant would begin the beginning point to the food truck.
Well, it'd be how we described it, but
That was how we were anticipating it.
Or Claire, I guess you could say to the shop.
And then when a new restaurant moves in, does that start a new 400 feet?
No, I think we would have something in there that says, you know, if the food truck comes first, then basically people know that the food truck's there and they came in afterwards. You don't have to get new approval just to continue operating.
The other deal on that, why does it have to be a restaurant that is their, I'll call it a sponsor? How come it can't be another brick and mortar business?
It can be. It actually says it's accessory to a primary use. So it just has to be serving that particular use and those patrons.
Right. An office or a garage.
Yeah, that's
that
true.
would have people coming in. So we're not stuck to the restaurant. Is that correct? Because that was part of some of them that's been discussed, that it had to be a restaurant.
That's true, Mayor. For an example, you have the distillery. They're not a restaurant, but they use food trucks auxiliary to their business. So that's a good point.
I just had one quick question. So have we talked to the restaurant associations that are local to us and other businesses outside of Bend to get a feel for what they think about the ordinance?
We have not.
Potential ordinance.
We have not, but we could definitely follow up on that.
I think that may answer some of the questions that Councilman Ferguson had, Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson had, and others, to kind of give us a better feel on what the brick and mortar businesses think.
What if they say no, that we're opposed to?
Well, I mean, it's new for us, so it may be something that we may think one thing and get a different answer. So we just want to be sure.
I mean, just to say that they do. Right now, they ought to be opposed to anything because they think all of the restaurants are going to shut down. I mean, that's what Texas Restaurant Association is thinking right now. Most of the restaurants will shut down, and bars.
Hey, Claire.
Yes.
I'm actually going to come at this a little differently. I do like the auxiliary to an existing. I think that gives restaurants a different alternative for dealing with COVID that they don't necessarily have today. So you've got a restaurant, and that restaurant has a food truck. They might decide that they want to use that to increase throughput. So I like that idea of the kind of in tandem with an existing brick and mortar. I don't really have an issue with that. 1 hour's fine. I'd rather see this come at it instead of the 300 feet and permissions and all of that stuff. I'd rather just see us figure out, which I think we're going to get to in a little bit, is having either a food truck park designation, like an SUP, or having it in our parks. And that, I think, would give us the ability for residents to have the access to food trucks that they might want, but keep it in an area that's further away from restaurants. Quite frankly, these food trucks today, they don't sit somewhere. They actually create their own demand. They have an app. They have a social media following. They create events is what they do. And then they schedule those events and work an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then they're done. So I think that part of it might make me feel better about being able to have food trucks, which I know residents like, but being able to curtail that from being seen as a straight up, here I am 301 feet from your restaurant and I'm taking your business.
So can I get clarification on that? So you are good with the 1 hour. You like the auxiliary. 1 hour is fine, but you're not worried about getting consent from the business owners nearby or the restaurants nearby. Is that what you were saying?
They've got a brick and mortar restaurant already. They're already competing.
Okay.
So, Councilman, you're only supportive if they're auxiliary to an existing restaurant, not any other business, as we were discussing earlier.
Restaurant, catering, food service.
Okay.
I don't feel like an insurance agent can suddenly start up a food truck and run it outside of his, and I'm just picking that for random sake, but that seems really odd to me.
Okay. Council, would you like, I know we went through all this discussion. We could go on, given Councilmember Gilmore's comments, we could go through the remainder of the presentation, because that may help inform whether or not you want to allow those standalone. So if you wanted to just stick with auxiliary, if you're also going to allow food truck parks and food trucks in parks, that may help you make this decision. Do you want to move on?
Move on to the regular agenda?
No, we'll move on to the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Mayor, I know we're lagging here.
I'm ready to move on to the next agenda item and come back to it, because this has got too many open questions on it to me.
Well, I think that the next few slides are going to be a lot less confusing. So, do you want me to go for it? Yeah. So the next one, Richard's going to just quickly go through food truck parks and what they are and kind of our proposal.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this part of the presentation deals strictly with the food truck parks, unlike what our previous discussion was. And these are permanent developments. This is a specific area where food trucks congregate on private property, and it's the primary use of the property. It's not an accessory use. Currently, they are not allowed in Louisville under our current zoning ordinance because they are an unlisted use. We have had some discussions with a possible food truck park that is proposed at a site near the Charles Emery Old Town Station. Next slide shows an aerial there on the left where that would be located. And it's a current site that used to have a warehouse and quite a bit of paid parking. The concept plan is shown here on the left, and you can see it has various components. It has parking, it has eating areas. I believe it also has entertainment areas for like a possible stage where entertainment could be provided in conjunction with the food truck park. Next slide. So kind of thinking back to the chart with our comparison cities, there are several that do require either special zoning or a special use permit for a food truck park. There's also quite a few other communities in the region that are not comparison cities that also allow these type of land uses with SUPs or special zonings. So if you recall, we've had our SUP process in place for about 7 years. It's worked very, very well. It is a tool that allows the council, the P&Z, and staff to look at a proposal on a case-by-case basis, look at the surrounding developments, look at impacts on surrounding developments, and it also gives you the ability to add conditions just depending on the situation at hand. So some primary factors that would be considered with a food truck park, again, would be the proximity and the impact of nearby brick and mortar businesses, as well as the distance to residential uses. So again, we have to kind of look to see what's around it. We'd have to look at hours of operation, and we have to kind of look at their package of amenities, such as if they're going to have fixed seating, what type of restroom facilities would they offer, their landscaping, also shade, if there's existing shade or they'd be providing shade structures. We would also look at the infrastructure that would be needed to accommodate the food truck park, like electricity and water connections. Of course, all of the different amenities would need to be ADA accessible, so that would need to be proven up on their proposal. And again, parking is an issue too. Is there public parking available nearby, or would they have on-site parking? Each one would be on a case-by-case basis. That's also, keep in mind, this is SUP is a public hearing process, so there is a notification process for property owners within 200 feet of the property boundary. So there's an opportunity for any impacted landowners or entities in the vicinity would have their chance to participate in that process. So with that, we're looking for some direction from you tonight. We've got a golden opportunity. We're kind of in the home stretch of our development code overhaul, and this would be a very opportune time. We could add food truck parks as a use allowed only by an SUP in our non-residential districts and our mixed-use districts. So we're looking from a direction from you tonight if we should move forward with that. We feel that this is kind of a growing trend, particularly in TOD, transit-oriented development type areas around stations and mixed-use villages, that we are seeing quite a bit of development and activity and expect a lot more in the coming years. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions or receive some direction.
So just the question of should we include it is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, why wouldn't we? And then we're prepared if something comes along. I do have a couple of questions. So just kind of looking at concept drawing, listed 71 parking spaces. Couldn't really get a sense of how many people you could cram into that area, but it did raise two questions for me. One, do these food truck parks have regulations similar to what fire marshals have for enclosed spaces? In other words, a maximum capacity of people, given that, there's a lot of propane tanks on board here. And the other question is, looking at, again, your proposed, and I know it's not final, but it listed 71 parking spaces. If I figure 1.5 people a car, you might figure higher, and I get about 100 people. But it looks like the park could hold more than 100 people. So how do you regulate possibly setting time limits on parking signs in the neighborhood so you don't create chaos? And those are my two questions for now.
Those are all would be things that we would have to look at on a case-by-case basis. And with this example, knowing that we have the station probably within about 200 feet just across the tracks, you know, there's a lot that would be a situation where there's an abundance of public parking. Also, another factor too would be, you know, if there's any existing urban style living that was within walking distance, then those folks would be coming on foot. So there's a lot of different factors. And again, that's the SUP process was really designed to look at each proposal on a case-by-case basis. Those are all factors that we would have to look at each time an application is submitted.
Okay, go.
Okay, so an SUP, typically you're going to have all departments looking at a situation like this. The example there, your fire marshal, building official, you know, your environmental control system, they'll all look at it. But in this case, you would have an exiting issue with the gate. If they were gated, you had a fenced-in area. Most of the tanks, most of the vans, most of the mobiles will have exempt amounts of gasoline and propane. But again, those various departments would look at that SUP, whether it's outdoor, semi-outdoor, or whatever, and they would be applying their codes to it on a case-by-case basis as they submit that in as an SUP process.
So, Councilman, I think his answer is you would have a capacity limit.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from other council members?
I just want to say I completely agree. The SUP process is the way to go. On a side comment, I think that the possible food truck, that's a great location. Can we not build a parking lot right across from the railroad though? Can we reconfigure the parking would be my only, and I know that that's way in the weeds. Just had to say it while I had the opportunity.
Correct.
Okay.
Next.
Yeah. Okay.
I have one other quick comment. I'd much rather do this, the SUP, the truck, whatever location, than even look at anything that competes with brick and mortar on, so many feet away. I mean, if you give me a choice, have both, have one, have the other. Give me the truck park and forget the 300 feet and all that jazz.
Yeah, Claire, that was my point on previous comment as well. I think this is an amenity, and it allows us to focus development, and that property will become more valuable as it becomes more used. And then who knows what gets built there in the future.
Okay. The last slide was going to be handled by Stacy.
All right. Thanks, Claire. Mayor, council members, park fans, talking a little bit about running a pilot program out in the park system at a few parks out there. And really, there's 3 reasons why we would want to run this program. One is to activate the park, to engage people and coming out to the park and stay a little longer than normal, give some extra opportunities to socialize. In the case of like the Triangle Park, give an opportunity to get people out and introduce them once we start programming out there and building the park. At Thrive, giving people an option that if they come and work out at lunch and they don't have a lot of time to get back to their office, they can pick something up on the way out. But also to solve food deserts, and not essentially in the way that you think of it in terms of lack of healthy food, though we would have that option, but also those places that they're so remote that once you get there, if you've forgotten something, you don't have anything to drink or eat, you're out there, you got to get back in the car and leave, like would be the case at Lake Park or Railroad. And then the final case would be revenue generation. If you remember, when we set up the financial support and sustainability strategy, we talked about creating revenue generation that we could reinvest back in the park system and programs with little imposition on the park staff or park infrastructure. And these are really ways that we could do that. So what we would do is we'd identify a place in each park where a food vendor could park, not only their food truck, but maybe set up some tables if we don't have a gazebo or anything to support that, and offer food for sale to the park goers. And what we would do is we would kind of set up a call for vendors with a standardized application, minimum qualifications. Obviously, they'd have to have an annual permit from Chris and his crew, or get it within a certain time, their first day of offering things. If it got really popular, we could have a lottery system for qualified vendors. If they all wanted to be at Central Park and there was only 1 or 2 spaces there, we'd do a draw. We'd talk about making sure that each of the vendors understand what their maintenance obligations are in terms of cleaning up after themselves, being stewards of the park. And if they did not live up to those, we wouldn't consider them for future vendor permits in future years, and we might suspend theirs at that time if they became a burden. So that's typically what we're going to look at. We would have it a flat monthly fee per location that could vary seasonally. In our most populated or well-traveled parks, we could have a higher fee. We have some options and some flexibilities there, but it is a really good way to generate some revenue for the park system and activate parks that may need an extra boost. And that is all.
Do you guys have any comments on that?
I do.
Okay, go for it.
I'm for it.
I read this through about 37 times. So, yes, so you mentioned a lottery system. I'd like for us to look, instead of a lottery system, at some sort of rating structure for evaluating who's in, who's out. Things like a history of operation, history of health inspections, financial statement, perhaps do the extra bonus points if they offer healthy food choices. It's an incomplete list, but between just randomly choosing and not knowing what I'm going to get and being more selective and saying, do you run a good operation? Are you financially sound? Have you done well in other cities if you've operated there? What is it you're selling? Are you killing people? Are you making them better, more healthy? I'd rather look at that than a lottery.
Okay.
I'm looking at this and having some familiarity with someone who dealt with food trucks at a park. The one thing you have to make sure of is that you have the bodies there for the parks, because that's the way you're going to get those food trucks. And the flat fee, that may be good for a start, but if you really want to see how well they're doing, if it's really moving and you have people there, you may want to do a percentage of sales so you can see who's the best performers. And if that starts really moving, then the non-performers or the people who don't show up, you can bump from the list. I like the healthy food options as kind of a scoring system. But the key is going to be, like, I'm looking at Thrive. Thrive will probably have a lot of people. I'm looking at the other parks. The key is on getting bodies there to pique the interest of the food truck, because they have to make money in that time that they're there. So that's kind of where I'm like, okay, how are we going to do that? But I like the idea generally.
So, council, what I've heard some of you say is that you would like to start with us developing an ordinance that would allow food truck parks with an SUP process. You would want to allow food trucks in parks, but that you are not comfortable with allowing food trucks close to existing restaurants. Is that the consensus?
What was that last bit about a busy restaurant?
That you would prefer not to have restaurants that are within 300 to 500 feet of existing restaurants. We don't even want to put that on the table, that we would have food parks or food trucks in parks, but we would not have that third option. Is that what you're hearing?
No.
Donna, one thing didn't rule out is allow a food truck. I'm reading a slide here, number 8, allow a food truck to be an accessory use to a primary use located on the same property, and to such extent practical, located and oriented the vehicle on site in a manner which clearly serves employee. You got the rest of it. And so
you're okay with that, Councilman, even if there's already, like, say, 2 other restaurants? Let's say it's a catering business, and they're going to allow the food truck, but the food truck would be auxiliary to that catering business, but there are also 2 restaurants in that strip center. Would that be a problem for you, or would we need to get permission of those 2 restaurants, or?
I'd still want to see the permission of the other restaurants.
Okay. I just wanted to get clear on that one.
I don't want any permission from the other restaurants. Because when did we go in to establish businesses for the restaurants? Are we going to guarantee them a profit? And we can limit the number of people that can, or the number of food trucks that can go into an area, or if they go in at all. But to guarantee that they're going to make money, I don't think that's our business.
I think what he was saying there is, if we allow a food truck as an auxiliary business, let's say there is a catering business and they want to have a food truck, but there are also 2 restaurants in that same shopping center that are within a certain feet, we would need to get permission of those 2 restaurants before we would.
How would they give permission to something that in everybody else's mind is taking business away from them? Because that's the only reason we're talking to them.
Well, the thought would be perhaps that it would bring more people to the shopping center. I mean, if you had a restaurant and you thought you had already, good business, but you thought a food truck would bring more people, that might be one reason that you would approve it.
Then you wouldn't need to ask them.
Well, you certainly might be in a better position if you asked. That would be my suggestion.
What I'm looking at, if you're asking them, the worst thing that could happen to everybody involved, except for the owner of that restaurant, is that they say no.
Well, if they say no,
the black bean.
Yeah, if they say no, it would be a question if there were 2 and one said yes and one said no. I guess you would have to have.
Well, if the way it's there is, it doesn't have to be everybody. If one says no, then it can't be there. I'm assuming they're independent operators of the 2 restaurants. If one says no, it can't go there.
They're within that square footage, right? There's really no restaurants close to that, right? Okay. So we'll bring back an ordinance, and it sounds like we still need to have some discussion about auxiliary type functions.
Donna?
Yes, sir?
What's keeping the catering kitchen from opening a to-go window today?
To go from their building?
Yeah.
Chris, can you answer that question? I don't know the configuration of their building.
No, well, just in theory, is there anything stopping them from having a to-go window or setting up a lunch counter? I mean, maybe they have to adjust the building a little bit or something like that, but really, effectively, they can do that, right?
They could probably do that. Right. I don't know a rule that would prevent that, Eric.
Yeah, on a simple basis, nothing, but they could have to do an engineering site plan. It's a tight site and they're drive-through wiped out parking, but they could do it if they could meet the codes.
Yeah, so that to the whole dialogue on whether another restaurant should be able to thumbs up or thumbs down if they have a truck out in the parking lot. I think that's. They don't have to approve having a catering kitchen turn into a to-go window or a cafe. So I don't see the difference.
Understood. We will, where we have clear direction, we'll bring that back to you. And then where we have some questions, we'll bring back some different examples so that council can spend a little bit more time on that particular issue. Does that work, council?
Yes.
Works for me.
Okay, okay. So Mayor, that's the presentation, and that is your workshop.
Okay, so we can move on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll go to the regular session. First item is public hearing. City Secretary.
Public hearing number 1. Consideration of an ordinance granting a zone change from single-family residential to Old Town mixed-use district on .52 acres located at 135 West Walter Street. This zoning change will allow the operation of a music school and studio at this site. P&Z recommended approval by a vote of 7-0. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption. Planning Director Richard Lukey is available to address any questions.
Okay. Is there anyone here to speak on that?
I'm sorry, no, sir. I did not receive any comments, and I do not believe we do not have any hands raised.
Okay. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I just have one comment or a question, I guess. I did drive by the location today. There are 2 large trees there. They weren't addressed in anything. Are those trees going to remain?
Richard, can you answer that question? My thought is they do remain. Is that right?
Yes, we're currently reviewing their Old Town development plan, and they'll have to address those trees. From what I understand, they will remain as they are. They may trim them up some, but I believe the plan is to keep them in place. Because the parking will be at the site where the existing carport is going back. They're not proposing any paving in front of the house.
Trimming, I think, would be a good idea, yes.
Any other questions?
Close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion other than what we've already done? Okay. City Secretary, call the roll.
So Councilmember Troyer made the motion. Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, Counselor?
This is an ordinance of the Louisville City Council amending the zoning ordinance by rezoning approximately 0.52 acres legally described as Lot 6 in a portion of Lot 2, Block E, OT Louisville Edition, and located at 135 West Walter Street, from single-family residential R-7.5 district zoning to Old Town mixed-use 2 district zoning, correcting the official zoning map, preserving all other portions of the zoning ordinance, determining that the public interest and general welfare demand the zoning change amendment therein made, providing for repeal or severability of penalty and effective emergency.
Okay, City Secretary, call the roll.
So Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson made the motion. Councilmember Jones seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Okay, thank you. Item 2.
Consider public hearing. Consideration of a resolution authorizing the adoption of the Community Development Block Grant 2020 Annual Action Plan. Authorization for the city manager to submit the plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, an acknowledgement of receipt of the recommended fiscal year 2020-2021 City Social Service Agency Fund budget of $170,000 from the CDBG Advisory Committee. An annual action plan must be submitted to the HUD by August 15, 2020, as a requirement to receive CDBG funds in fiscal year 2020-2021. The CDBG Advisory Committee voted 4-0 to recommend a social service budget with CDBG and city funds, and voted 5-0 to recommend approval of the annual action plan. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the resolution and acknowledge receipt of the recommended budget as set forth in the caption.
Okay, sure. Do we have a motion to approve? Anybody?
I think we need a motion to close the public hearing first.
Excuse me.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
Move to close the public hearing.
I was trying to move it forward. So, okay, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. City Secretary, call the roll.
So Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green made the motion. Councilmember Gilmore seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those are all aye votes.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay. City Secretary, call the roll.
Mayor, Councilmember Troyer made the motion. Councilmember Jones seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those are all aye votes.
Okay, thank you. Now we're down to item 3, public hearing.
Consideration of an amendment to the Community Development Block Grant 2019 Annual Action Plan as a means of accepting CDBG-CV CARES Act funding. Authorization for the city manager to submit the plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and consideration of the staff recommendation to designate priority needs and set target funding amounts. An amendment to the CDBG 2019 Annual Action Plan must be submitted to the HUD as a requirement to receive supplemental CDBG funding from the CARES Act in the amount of $452,305. The CDBG Advisory Committee recommended adoption by a vote of 5-0. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the amendment to the 2019 Annual Action Plan, authorize the city manager to submit the plan to the HUD, and consider a staff recommendation to designate priority needs and set target funding amounts as set forth in the caption above.
Okay. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Sure.
I did.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. City Secretary, call the roll.
So Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson made the motion. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those are all aye votes.
Okay. Do you have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, second. Is there any discussion?
I have a question for the city attorney. Do we need to have any more specific language in that motion?
No, I'm assuming that y'all are taking the staff recommendation.
Do you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay. City Secretary, call the roll.
Show Councilmember Jones made the motion, Councilmember Troyer seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson,
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Visitor Citizen Forum. Speakers must address their comments to the mayor rather than to individual council members or staff. Speakers should speak clearly and state their name and address prior to beginning their remarks. Speakers will be allowed 5 minutes for testimony. Speakers making personal, impertinent, profane, and slanderous remarks may be removed from the meeting. Unauthorized remarks from the audience, stamping of feet, whistles, yells, clapping, and similar demonstrations will not be permitted. In accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, the City Council is restricted from discussing or taking action on items not listed on the agenda. Action can only be taken at a future meeting. Mayor, I received no cards for anyone to speak, and we have no one showing they wish to speak.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve it?
That was just visitors. We need consent.
Excuse me.
That's okay.
Okay, now we're down to
Consent agenda. All of the following items on the consent agenda are considered to be self-explanatory by the council and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member or citizen so requests. For a citizen to request removal of an item, a speaker card or a comment card must be filled out and submitted to the city secretary. Mayor, I received no cards, and we do not show anyone wishing to speak.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So
Move
moved.
to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Or second.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay. City Secretary, call the roll.
Mayor, I show Councilmember Troyer made the motion and Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson,
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Okay. Now we're down to item 6, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Good, go ahead.
Item 6, consideration of one alternative standard to the IH-35E Corridor Overlay District regulations on a 1.130 acre lot located on the west side of Lake Vista Drive, approximately 570 feet south of East Vista Ridge Mall Drive. A new 2-story office retail building is proposed on the site, and the applicant is requesting an alternative standard to allow 6 exterior building colors to be used on each elevation. The Overlay District Board recommended approval by a vote of 6-0. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the alternative standard as set forth in the caption. Planning Director Richard Lukey is available to address any questions.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for city staff?
I do.
Go ahead.
So I think this is kind of broadly for city staff in general, and I did talk to the city attorney earlier to make sure the direction I am interested in is covered by the agenda. So the Overlay District Board approved an increase from 3 to 6 colors and a 75% length of the building in lieu of 50% for awning for a canopy. I'm okay with the canopy. It's not an issue with me. It does always concern me every time we come to the Overlay District, which is our, protection against cardboard and corrugated steel, to make modifications. I'm not saying that over time things will happen that will cause us to change our perspective, or that the plan is absolutely flawless, that there could be something in it that we didn't really realize. But in this instance, simply stating it as a change from 3 colors to 6 colors gives me a lot of heartburn. And to me, it opens the door to a building that looks like it came out of a bag of candy. And so I'd rather see, and I will make the motion that we approve the alternative standard to allow 75% of the facade length. But that we allow 4 colors of brick and 2 types of stone. That's the request that the applicant made. The applicant didn't ask for 6 colors per se. They requested 4 colors of brick and 2 types of stone. And so I would move that we approve the use of 4 colors of brick and 2 types of stone and a 75% canopy and coverage.
For clarification on the canopy, that was already approved since it was at the percentage that the overlay board can approve. So that request does not require any council action.
Okay, then I'll amend my motion to remove that.
Are all those items discussed so far, were those acceptable to staff and met the criteria that they were looking at?
Yes, that's acceptable to staff.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
I just wanted to say I agree with what Neil is saying about opening the door for the colors. I know we have, that's a variance we get frequently. This is probably one of the biggest. 6 going from 3 to 6 is probably one of the biggest I've seen. So I'm happy that we have revised the motion as Neil has suggested.
Okay. Anybody else?
I do have one question. I drove by the property today and looking at the plans, is the building going to be parallel to Lake Vista Drive, or is it going to be at an angle?
It will be facing Lake Vista Drive.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Mayor, Council, I might also remind you that we did bring this item to you earlier, and we do have staff, or we have council direction to bring back a change to the ordinance, which would move the number from 3 to 5, I believe. Is that right, Claire?
Yes.
Okay, so it still fits within the staff's direction on that y'all were going under?
It's one more color than what we had discussed earlier, but the direction we have from council is to go from 3 to 5.
Okay.
That's also the reason why I'm making it very specific that this, what we're approving is 4 colors of brick and 2 stone rather than just a palette.
Understand. No, it's a good clarification.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, City Secretary, call the roll.
Actual Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson made the motion and Councilmember Jones seconded the motion. Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson, can I get you to restate your motion for the minutes, please?
Yes, that we approve an alternative standard as requested, but specify that it is for 4 colors of brick and 2 types of stone.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All right. So Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson made the motion. Councilmember Jones seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson.
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Thank you. Now we're down to item 7.
Consideration of an ordinance amending section 15-35 to establish the speed limit of 50 miles per hour on State Highway 121 frontage roads northbound and southbound from Denton Taft Road to the east city limits at Stanridge Drive and eliminate certain unnecessary or redundant street entries for the State Highway 121. The speed study conducted on the State Highway 121 frontage roads recommends the speed limit be lowered to 50 miles per hour through Louisville. This agenda item also proposes to eliminate certain unnecessary or redundant street entries in the ordinance pertaining to speed limits for State Highway 121. The Transportation Board recommended approval by a 6-0 vote with 1 member absent. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption. City Engineer David Salmon is available to address any questions.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Do you have that?
What I heard was Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson made the motion and Councilmember Gilmore seconded the motion. Is that correct? Okay.
I think that was Councilmember Troyer.
Okay. Made the motion? All right.
Yes.
Councilmember Troyer made the motion. Councilmember Gilmore seconded the motion.
Okay.
Councilmember Troyer?
Wait a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Counselor?
This is an ordinance of the Louisville City Code amending the Louisville City Code, Chapter 15, Section, let me start over. This is an ordinance of the Louisville City Council amending the Louisville City Code, Chapter 15, Section 15-35 by amending the speed limit on the State Highway 121 frontage roads and eliminating certain unnecessary or redundant street entries, providing for repealer of severability and a penalty, providing an effective date, and declaring an emergency.
Councilmember Troyer?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson?
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green?
Aye.
Mayor, those are all aye votes?
Thank you. Now we're down to-
Could I make one comment on that? Like I
Yes,
said
go ahead.
earlier, I did do a lot of driving today, and not that I don't believe TxDOT, but I drove the access road from Denton Tap all the way to Standridge, and I had my cruise control set on 50 miles per hour. And in the middle of the afternoon, I had not one car pass me driving over 50 miles an hour. So, the 50 mile per hour speed limit is a good limit. Everybody was driving it, even though it's 55 now.
Okay. Thank you. City Secretary, next item.
Agenda item 8. Consideration of an ordinance amending section 15-204 to prohibit U-turns on eastbound Windhaven Parkway at the first median opening east of Josie Lane. Staff received a request from Denton County Freshwater District 1A to prohibit left turns on eastbound Windhaven Parkway at the first median opening east of Josie Lane. Staff concurs with the district's request. The Transportation Board recommended approval by a vote of 6-0 with one member absent. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption. City Engineer David Salmon is available to address any questions.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I have a question
Go ahead.
for David. So, no problem with this U-turn sign, don't panic. So we have a U-turn sign for the eastbound traffic on Windhaven, and I can see where people might be making a U-turn in order to whip into the back of the Target parking lot. They don't really have a similar situation for the westbound traffic where they would necessarily want to make a U-turn and whip into the back of some other or front of some other business. But it still raises the question, is there a reason we're putting a no U-turn here and allowing the westbound to continue to U-turn?
The main reason, of course, is that there is no left turn bay there, so you're having to make that left turn or U-turn from the main lane.
Okay, I see that now when I look at it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that I did drive by there today too, and this was the middle of the afternoon, and when I got to where I would have made a U-turn there, I had 3 cars behind me lined up that would have, tried to run me over. So it's a good one. And yes, the left-hand bay is there going westbound.
Yeah, like I said, I have no issue with the U-turn where we're putting it. I didn't know why we're not putting it on the other side. When I look at the map, I can see the left turn lane now. So thank you. Sorry. Thanks for the clarification.
Are there any other questions at this time? Okay, we have a motion and a second.
We need a motion.
Okay.
Move to approve.
Second.
We've already got the motion.
No, we don't have a motion yet. We need the motion.
And the second already.
Yeah, we're good now.
Okay. Counselor?
This is an ordinance of the Louisville City Council amending the Louisville City Code, Chapter 15, Article 8, Traffic Regulations in Castle Hills, Section 15-204, certain terms prohibited, by prohibiting U-turns on eastbound Wind Haven Parkway at the first median opening east of Josie Lane, providing for repeal of severability, penalty, and an effective date, declaring an emergency.
Okay. Good Secretary, call the roll.
Councilmember Troyer,
Aye. Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson,
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones. You vote.
I didn't see it.
Councilmember Jones, aye. Okay, he's saying aye. I can see it.
Oh, you're turned off.
The space button isn't working. Aye.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Gray.
Aye.
Mayor, those are all aye votes.
Good, thank you. Now we're number 9.
Consideration of a resolution extending the declaration of local disaster for public health emergency signed by Mayor Rudy Durham until 11:59 p.m. on August 17, 2020. Ongoing evaluation of circumstances related to the virus and the updated recommendations of the Centers for Disease Control and the Texas Department of State Health Services indicate that the conditions necessitating the disaster declaration have and will continue to exist for a period extending beyond August 3rd, 2020. The recommendation is that the City Council consider the resolution as set forth in the caption.
Okay. Do you have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, City Secretary, call the roll.
So Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson made the motion and Councilmember Jones seconded the motion. Councilmember Troyer,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson,
Aye.
Councilmember Gilmore,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Mayor, those were all aye votes.
Okay, thank you. Now we're down to reports. Is there anyone from staff that has a report?
Yes, sir.
Nothing? Okay. Then we'll move to Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
I have nothing to report.
Okay. Councilmember Jones?
No report.
We're going good now. Councilmember Gilmore?
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing to add.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. MCL Grand, we do have a few things going on. First on the list in performances, we're doing a virtual concert with Sarah Jaffe. Originally was scheduled to be a live concert. Now it's going to be virtual, presented by the City of Louisville. That'll live stream on August the 15th. And then acoustic jam sessions presented by the Visual Arts League. I show are still continuing on Fridays. I haven't seen how they handle masks, but I hope that they're being safe. Activities, we have a watercolor workshop with Nell Dorn Bird, and that's presented by the Visual Arts League of Louisville, and that's August 5th through 7th. Garden Secrets workshop that's presented by Keep Louisville Beautiful has for August 6th has been canceled. Eric Smith Songwriter Challenge presented by Visual Arts Leagues is set up for August the 7th, and a virtual art workshop presented by the Visual Arts League for August 11th. And if you do go to the MCL Grand, there is an art exhibition presented by Visual Arts League called Fresh Ideas. This is something they do every year, and it runs from July 15th to August 18th. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth going to look at. And that's all I have. Visit mclgrand.com for more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Troyer.
Yes, Mayor. I just have a shout out to the Public Works Department, especially the Water Department, for handling a break in my water meter coming from the street to the house. I had a break on the water line to the street broke on Friday. The one on my side of the meter broke on Wednesday. The city side break didn't show up until my side was fixed. But I was really impressed with the rapid response of the water department to my request. From the time I called until it was repaired was about an hour and a half. And Mark Trimble of the water department did a yeoman's job of working underwater to get the break fixed. So that's my report.
Okay, thank you. Kudos to the water department. Okay. Now we're down to, we have any closed session?
No, sir.
Okay. Do we have any other action to be taken?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to second to adjourn. Could you call roll?
I show Councilmember Jones made the motion, Councilmember Troyer seconded the motion, Councilmember Troyer,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ferguson,
Aye.
Councilman Gilmore,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Green.
Aye.
Okay.
Mayor, those are all I votes.
Okay, motion passes. Thank y'all very much. And we are out of here before 9 o'clock. Thank you.
All right.